Week 18. Last week, I set up RevenueCat for my app in a data layer only. I haven't actually implemented any features of RevenueCat. It's just the repository in the app. What is RevenueCat, I hear you ask, and why are you using it? RevenueCat is a software as a service platform for developers, primarily mobile developers like me. So if you're looking to write an app for Android and iOS, RevenueCat might actually be of interest to you. There are sort of many different ways of monetizing an app. In other words, there are many different ways of trying to make money from an app. And besides being a hobby, why else would you be writing an app? To provide a livelihood for yourself and your family. The most commonly used method, as far as I understand, is injecting ads into your app. That can be really annoying. I've definitely used those apps before. Some ads would just pop up in the middle of you trying to do something important, and then it stays on that page for a minute or two, and you can't exit out of it. I find that very annoying. I certainly don't want my app to do that. It could work well for sort of apps that can't really command a price tag, and you just want to make money from it, and still also while allowing your user to use your app without having to pay for it. I'm not dissing it. It's just like it's not an experience I would want for my customers to have. The second way is, of course, just putting a price tag on your app, right? And this is the simplest and easiest way of doing it. You write an app, somebody buys it for $5, and they can use it forever. You don't have to worry about doing anything other than that, except for collecting the money up front. And the app stores, both Android and iOS app stores, actually make that process fairly straightforward. Like, you don't have to handle payments yourself. They handle it. They handle all the fraud. They actually tank all the risks. When you start taking money from people, you expose yourself to risks. What if the person does a chargeback? What if it's all of that. You don't have to worry about any of that. The app stores worry about that for you. In exchange, of course, you pay commission to them. As far as I understand, Google Play charges 15% for your revenue, and Apple charges 30%. And just a side note, people might think it's unfair, but people spend way more money on Apple than on Google, on iPhones than on Android phones. So, you could argue that, but most developers actually target iOS devices, your iPhone devices, sooner than they would target Android, because they know they can make more money. You pay $30. Sorry, you pay 30%, 15% more than Google. So what? Make money from it. Anyways, I thought about doing that, but the problem with the app that I'm developing, it doesn't really, you can't really do that. This one-time payment thing works really well for apps that don't incur a marginal cost per use. Right, let's say you wrote a calculator app, and then somebody downloads it and then uses it, and the person pays you $1 or $2, and that's it. The app gets installed on their device, and when they're using it, they're using their compute power. They're not really costing you anything, you as the developer anything. That works well. Problem is, the app I'm writing, I depend on a lot of back-end services to make it work. The whole value proposition for my app is connecting all those pieces together, right? And I can't possibly say to somebody, okay, you're just gonna pay me, I'm gonna make it up, $100, and then you can use this app forever, unlimited use. I'm gonna go out of business really quickly. So I can't do that. So in that situation, what would you do? You would set up a recurring subscription, like a lot of apps do nowadays. Now, to be fair, I don't really think it's, at least in my opinion, it's not terribly fair for an app to start charging you monthly when there's no marginal cost to it. There's a lot of apps like that nowadays. Now, I personally don't like it. That doesn't mean that they can't do it. You do whatever you do. If you have a compelling product and people are willing to pay for it monthly, so be it. It's none of my business. But I don't. If I were to write an app like that, I wouldn't want to do that. But my app has marginal cost, and pretty significant one at that. Some of the backend services charges me every time when some things get done, and then I can't just tank that. I have to pass that on to the people who use my app. So I have to set up a subscription situation. And oh boy, that's a rabbit hole I never thought I would get into. taking money from people is quite complicated to begin with on iOS and Android. Taking money from people on a recurring basis is even more complicated. And there's a lot of things that you have to worry about when it comes to transacting on Google Play Store and iOS App Store. And originally I was thinking about doing it myself, in other words, creating necessary database tables, tracking the user entitlements, in other words, the user subscription status, their subscription history, payment history, offering history, promotion, and all of that, right? Like, you create 3 or 4 new tables and then it would become a spider web of situations in your database that you're hoping to keep simple because you want to keep the costs down. And in addition to that, you have to add a lot of app logic, because a lot of the logic that takes place when a user makes a transaction, makes a purchase on your app, takes place client side. I mean, there's a lot of server side logic as well, but a good chunk of it is actually client side. So your app has to be sort of programmed to not only do it, but also be robust enough to handle any exceptions. When I started looking into sort of the amount of things that I have to worry about, number one, just to make it work, and number two, to make it robust, do I really want to do this? Turns out, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, so long as you're willing to pay somebody to do it for you. There are those software as a service platforms on the internet, and RevenueCat is one of them, that essentially takes care of it for you. It acts as the back end that you would otherwise have to write, and it then interacts with the Google Play Store and iOS App Store to handle the transactions for you. So in other words, instead of your app containing all the logic with regards to the financial transactions and the subscriptions, and then your app interacting with your backend database to update user entitlements and purchase history and all of that crap, you hand it all over to RevenueCat. And now, to be clear, there's still some amount of client-side logic that has to happen. Google doesn't, like Google or Apple, they don't really interact directly with RevenueCat directly when it comes to making purchases. Your device would still have to generate the purchase ID and the token after a transaction is successful with Google Play Store or iOS App Store. However, the rest of it is taken care of by RevenueCat. RevenueCat keeps track of what the user is entitled to after the subscription becomes active. Their notification reminders when the subscription is about to elapse and then they don't have the auto pay turned on. Their payment history, subscription history, their offer history if you're to come up with promotions, right? All of that, RevenueCat. And another benefit I didn't even realize is that if you didn't have this RevenueCat situation, let's say that you want to have a promotion in your app when you pull up the paywall, the page where user decides to subscribe to your app, right? You'd have to come up with some kind of, either come up with server-side logic where your server feeds the app information about promotion and the app then displays the promotion information, or you'd have to push out a new update on your app so that the user can actually see the updated promotion, because again, you're in control of the UI component, and a promotion necessarily necessitates a change on the UI side. There is one interesting feature in RevenueCat called Paywall that sort of bypasses this problem. In the SDK that you integrate into your app, you can just call up the paywall and then you change the paywall on RevenueCat side. In other words, you're actually creating and maintaining a small piece of UI element pertaining to purchases of your app and subscriptions to your app on the server side. In other words, if you have to run a promotion, if you have to change prices, you do that server side. You never actually have to push out an update on your app or create custom logic on your UI side so that your backend can inform it. And I find that quite handy. And with all of these services, RevenueCat obviously is not doing it for free. And frankly, given the complexity of the things that it has to deal with, I feel bad if it's free, right? So what they do is they charge you a fee, and then fortunately, this fee is very, very solo developer, indie developer friendly. You don't pay them money until you hit a certain revenue goal, and that revenue goal, frankly speaking, is quite high for the vast majority of us. So in all probability, I likely, at least at the very beginning, would be able to enjoy their services without actually having to pay a fee. And after that, it's reasonable, at least per my understanding and calculation. So that's RevenueCat. It took me an entire week to actually put RevenueCat into my data layer because I made the biggest mistake. Well, I suppose one of the mistakes that you can make when you're writing an app, which is I trusted documentation. RevenueCat, I didn't even know. It was created in 2017, right? So it's within the last 7 or 8 years. It's a very new product. And as a result, the amount of updates that the service sees is ridiculous. Like every 3 months, they have new features, and not only that, breaking features, right? A lot of the old APIs, as well as the functions and methods and all of those get either deprecated, renamed, moved to a different package, and all of that. And their documentation hasn't been doing a very good job in sort of keeping up with all of that, at least the ones that I've been reading on their official website. So I don't think I'm looking at the wrong place. And as a result, I ran into a lot of build errors. And to mitigate that, if their documentation is not good enough, the only other place that you have to be you can look into is the files that they have, either the jar files, the class definition files, or it becomes quite tedious just to find the right name of the function or the method you're trying to access. That's why it took me an entire week, and I think I've gotten it in. The repo, the data layer part is done. And one other thing I want to complain about is that, unlike a lot of other SDK, the SaaS SDKs, they don't they create the singleton for you, right? Like for instance, in Supabase, you control the Supabase instance. If you want to make 2 for your tiny app, despite the fact that it's not the right thing to do in most cases, feel free, you go ahead and do that. Supabase is not preventing you from doing that. Whereas with RevenueCat SDK, you create one instance of it, and then you use it throughout your entire app. And it creates some challenges for me. Number one, breaks some of the code conventions that I've been keeping up in my data layer, so I have to say goodbye to that. Number two, I confused the crap out of me at the beginning, because originally I was trying to inject it into use dependency injection to put it into my app, and obviously you can't do that with a singleton. There's only one, and it's persistent in memory. Anyway, so I think that's all of that is behind me. And next week I hope to actually implement the data layer functions that I put into my app this week into the view models, and then actually make it work with my app. And that actually would entail quite a bit more work, I think, than I'm envisioning right now. One of the things I'm already thinking about is that I have to have logic, client-side logic, to deal with my server, my backend, when the entitlement takes place. Sure, RevenueCat provides you with a webhook that you can use, right? Like, for instance, when RevenueCat authenticates, verifies a particular purchase, it can ping directly from their server to your server backend to start some kind of function to update your server's database, right? That works, but RevenueCat doesn't guarantee a particular service level. Like, it doesn't tell you how quickly it can ping your backend when a purchase is successful. And what that means is that if you don't have client-side logic to preemptively tell your backend, even though those messages may not be the most authentic thing, because the client-side can always never trust the client-side logic, right? your user is going to run into a fairly frustrating experience where right after they spend money, they cannot use the app that you've promised them that they can, like all the functions that are behind the paywall. I think that's going to piss one or two people off, and I don't want that to happen. So not only would I have to worry about the webhook, the server-side function, but also the client side, I have to come up with a function to at least allow them to be able to use it for a day or two or something like that, right? So that it would reduce the amount of frustration should something wrong takes place in the whole transaction situation. That's the goal for next week. So the past week, RevenueCat is in the data layer. Next week, make RevenueCat work in the app, in the view models. That's it. I'll see you next week.